So, hello everyone. Welcome to another indie author interview. I am here with Erica Sebree, who is the author of Wild Heart of the Storm. There are three books in this series, but this is the first one. So, thank you so much
Mhm.
for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Awesome, awesome. So, let's just dive right into it. Tell me a little bit about your writing process, how you kind of decided that you wanted to be an author, and what your path to publication was.
So I was not a writer at all. um, I'm a visual artist. I work as a graphic designer, and I went to school, for art. I I didn't do so great in the English classes. So they were just like not interesting to me. So it took a while. I was in my 20s until when I first discovered fantasy, and I was like, "Oh, I found my genre finally." Like something that really like hooked me. And so I just like devoured all these fantasy series. And then one day I just kind of realized I I wanted to be more a part of these worlds. So I thought like being somebody who creates stuff anyway, I just wanted to like create my own world and my own characters and kind of pull all of the tropes and the character kind of personalities that I liked from all of my favorite books and just kind of like meld them all into one. It was my favorite. So that's what I did. And that was back in 2016.
Wow.
And from the beginning I was like, I'm definitely going to do traditional publishing. Like I don't want to worry about all that stuff. I don't want to have to, do all of the stuff that's going to make this um turn into a real book. But when I started querying and got so many rejections, I'm like, this sucks. This sucks for my mental health. So I kind of, would go through little spurts where I would send out, 10 or 20 queries while I'm continuing to write. And it wasn't until 2021, probably the pandemic had something to do with this, where I was just like, okay, I need to have a better plan now. I'm into writing the third book at this point.
Wow.
And so I decided on a number. I'm like, I'm gonna query 100 more agents and I'm gonna give it, how I
Wow.
don't know, a few months, which probably wasn't enough. But I'm gonna give myself sort of a time frame, a cutoff, where if I've not heard anything, then I'm gonna move toward self-publishing. So that's what happened. And I didn't quite do 100 because filtering out people who actually wanted fantasy, and then personally being that like this is a female main character, I wanted a female agent, and there weren't 100. I think I probably topped out at like 80 or something. I still sent a lot. And
Yeah.
that was in addition to like all of the other ones I'd already sent. So I did that and I'm like, okay, I gave it my all. I can officially walk away from this path and know that like I've tried my hardest to make this happen. So that's when I started, you know, researching who would be a really good author for this and like what do I want for my covers, that sort of thing, and figuring out all of the steps that were going to be involved with self-publishing. So I think I started in 2021 and then my first book came out in 2022. So, I mean, it took a while and that book was already written,
Yeah.
you know? That was just like all of the other stuff that had to go into it. So, that was my path of not being a writer at all to self-publishing.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned being a graphic designer. So did you design the covers? Did you get someone to design them?
So, while I am a graphic designer, I haven't designed book covers before. So I just didn't there were a lot of different um illustrative ones that I liked, and I'm not really an illustrator. Like I can do the design with text. That's sort of that that's my jam right there. But with book covers, I didn't want to have to just do a lot of Photoshop work, or that's not really something I'm super comfortable with. So yeah, so I've gotten cover designers for all of the books. The first one was done with a different artist, and I did like art direct them. I would supply like a lot of inspirational images or like here's kind of the color palette I want, and like exactly here's how I want the type to be because that's kind of my thing. So I was very picky with them, which they maybe didn't love. But and then she wasn't available for the second book, so I found a book cover company out of Ukraine, and I've used them for the last two color covers, and I'm really happy with how those turned out and how easy the process was working with them. And I get to support, like a little bit of Ukraine. So like that feels good.
Cool, cool. I
So
mean, I love these are like my favorite colors. I love purple. So, I mean, this
I
is
know.
obviously like a really beautiful cover, and I love like the background. Like this, it just I don't know, kind of reminds me of like basically Disney, like Florida, like with, it just that's what it looks like to me. Okay, so how did you write these books? Did you plan? Did you outline? Did you pants? What did you kind of do to write these?
So I am a big time planner.
Mm.
So like before I even came up with the idea of these books, I Googled how to write a novel.
So did you
So
read Save the Cat?
actually what I found was, well, the thing that resonated with me was this process called the snowflake method. And I
Yeah,
know, have you heard of it?
I've
Okay.
heard of it. I honestly think I heard of it when I was in English classes in college.
Oh, okay. That's great. I don't know that snowflake is like the exact right term for it, but I really do like the process. For those who don't know, it's like you basically start really small, like a sentence about here's what your book's going to be, and then you expand it into two sentences, and then you expand it into a paragraph, and then a page, and then four pages, and then you do that with all of your characters. So I probably had a document that was like 100 pages long of just
Wow.
all these notes. But also that's because I hadn't written anything like this before. I've only done like, I did some writing back in college and that sort of thing, and I journal a lot, but I haven't written like narrative before. So I think part of it was like I was procrastinating. I'm like, let me do more planning, more planning. And then when you get to the point where that stuff's all done, you make a spreadsheet of every single scene that's going to be in your book. So I really, it was good because it was hard to get writer's block because you know exactly what's going to happen. You know what each scene is going to be. I mean, I didn't have the details for everything that was going to happen in every scene, but I had the framework for all of them. So it felt less stressful when I got to the point of like actually, writing a chapter. So, yeah. So that was my
I
method.
I outline and plot too. I've been trying to kind of go through this. I found it on Amazon, to
Yeah.
just figure things out. And I mean, it's pretty extensive. I mean, you have like all of the scenes and everything in there, so
Oh
it's
wow.
like character profiles. Those really helped me because it
Yes.
was like I don't know, like I didn't know what they wanted. Like I didn't know what they looked like. Like I think it's kind of hard. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you're probably one of the first planners, because I think all the other authors were like, I'm a pantser and I'm not that way. And I can't, like, I am type A ADHD, and I was like, I can't do that. So I
I
was
can't
like, I
either.
need an idea. I need to have like a really good, foundation. So
Mhm.
so that's kind of helping me do kind of what you're talking about. Um
Well, it eliminates like plot holes for the
yeah,
most part. You're not done writing your novel and you're like, "Oh, wait a minute,
right.
like there's some continuity issues or there's a big hole in this plot." It sort of takes care of that stuff before you get around to writing it. So, and yeah, and like exploring your secondary characters. I didn't really think about that going in, but kind of writing a profile for each of them like in the snowflake method, I think it has like what's their conflict, their motivation, their epiphany, and I'm just like, I don't know. Like
Yeah,
let's get into their head a little bit because you know that for your main character and maybe a couple others, but some of these other characters it really helps bring out their personality, knowing this stuff.
for sure. Um, and what do you enjoy most about writing in the fantasy genre? What makes you love that so much and want to stick to? I mean, like you said, you've written three
Yeah.
books, so clearly you like it.
I do because it's a made up world. So I don't have to, follow our history or how our world works. Um, Now my world still does have like I had to come up with the history and I had to come up with like the
Right.
social structure, and my magic has rules. So I do have to follow the framework that I've created, but if I run into something where I'm like, oh, I need to come up with like a history for why this is the way it is, versus going and doing like a bunch of research about our world. So I really like that it just allows for more creativity.
Mm,
So it's like when you do run into one of those problems where you're like, well, why is it this way? Let me think about it. And yeah, you just get to be more creative about it instead of, oh, well, here's technically what the history is. I'll have to
right.
weave that in somewhere. So yeah, more creativity that way.
And
And I
it's
can't
also a
technically
challenge,
be wrong because it's a
right?
made up world.
Well, it's a challenge, right? And I think who was it? Oh my gosh, I can't remember. I'm trying to remember who it was, but I interview a lot of authors, so I can't really remember, but they have like a basically like a Bible, like a Bible of their
Yeah.
world. And so like to reference it, right? Because you need to be consistent and you know,
Hmm.
going with that. So like do you have anything like that where like you go back and like reference like, oh right, like this is kind of what this magic system is. So this can't happen, but this can. Like, do you have something like that?
I do a little bit, like, usually when I get to like the editing process, when I've printed it out and I'm, reading like an actual paper copy of it, I'll make some notes along the way of like, oh yeah, I decided this thing. And a lot of times it's just, here's the term I've decided to use for this thing in this world. So
Mm-hmm.
just to kind of make note of like in the future when I use this word. Um, but as far as like history and stuff, I forget a lot of that stuff. So sometimes I'll have to go back and like, did I mention this in book one? Or actually the most difficult part is probably who knows what. You
Yes.
know, when you're starting a new book, she hasn't revealed everything she's learned or even what she's gone through to everyone. It's sort of like started with the closest little group of people know kind of where she's been and what she's done. But, as that sort of friend circle expands, they know less and less about, where she was hiding and things like that, and how much she knows about the problems in their world. And so a lot of times I just need to go back and search some words that would bring it up in my book and find like, okay, who has she told this about or
Mm-hmm.
told this to? So that's probably the most difficult thing, is just who knows what and when did they learn this and like how did they react to it? And also, do I need to tell more people about this? Because I'm like, I can't get too far into this without, okay, everyone should probably know this knowledge by now. I should acknowledge that somewhere that this has been said.
And I mean, to
So
your story, like that's pretty integral, right? About who is
yeah.
allowed to know what and such like that, you know. So I mean, that's pretty important, especially in your story. Something
Mhm.
that I don't know just came to my mind. How did you choose the title for your book? Like, how did you choose Wild Heart of the Storm?
Oh yeah. Okay. So there's like kind of like two stories to it. So I was playing around with just a lot of keywords, and so there was this movie back in the 90s, I think, called Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken. And it is about a woman. Okay, so I'm not positive when this takes place. Maybe the 40s or something. But she was one of those women who would get on a horse and dive into a pool of water. Like that was a thing. Like the horse would run up this long ramp, she'd be waiting up there, jump onto the horse and dive into a pool of water.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
what they would do at like fairs and carnivals, I
Right.
guess, right? And she something happens on one of the jumps where I don't know if her eyes were open or something when she hit the water, but she goes blind. And
Oh,
so she's really struggling with this, but she still manages to do it again when she's blind, like memorizing it and knowing exactly where this horse is. And it was a really cool movie. So like that kind of was like playing around in my head, like that phrase of the wild heart thing. And then the title itself actually does reflect all of the main characters' magical abilities. So like the wild is like the growth, she can grow things. Heart is because she can bring things back to life. um And then Storm, because she has storm magic, but then also like Heart of the Storm is like she finds herself in the heart of a storm at the end. And
Mm,
then Wild Heart also plays on just her independence in the beginning of like she's been living on her own for 9 years. She's very self-sufficient. So it, it has a lot of meanings. And then I just decided I'm just going to carry this through the series and just change the last word to reflect what's currently happening in that story. So,
cool. I like that. I like that. And what do you kind of need in your writing space to stay focused? Like what helps you stay on task when you're writing?
no distractions. Like I yeah. So for me that usually means I'm only writing in the evening. For
Mm.
some reason, I need it to be dark out. I think it's because I like to have like my curtains closed. So I kind of feel like I'm, in my little cocoon and I just have the light over my desk and it just feels very like secluded. Um but I also this was probably back in 2016 when I first started getting into this. I read the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, and it's all about like
Yes.
creativity and how like ideas come to you and stuff. And I just loved it. It was so great. And so she did a podcast. I'm not sure if she still does it, but she had Neil Gaiman on once. And so
Yeah,
I'm
she
listening to
does.
this.
She's so
Yeah,
good.
it was so good. And so he's talking about how his rule is when he sits down to write, he can either look out the window or he can write. And he said after a while, looking out the window just gets kind of boring. And that has really worked for me. so so when I'm at the stage where I'm just writing narrative and I don't need to like switch between a lot of documents, I'll take my tablet and my little wireless keyboard and I'll go write in my bedroom because at night it's just like big dark purple curtains and a couple paintings on the wall. And I've seen those paintings so many times. So it gets really boring to just look at that. My only other option is to write. So yeah, so the no distractions writing in the evening. I did earlier on try to write in the morning. Like I would wake up a half hour earlier before I started doing all my morning stuff and getting ready for work. And while your mind is very clear then, it also doesn't have a lot of words in it.
Yeah.
So like I would just struggle with like basic words. It was just so like rudimentary the stuff that I would write that I would have to come back and do a lot of editing to just make it
Yeah.
sound better. So I like it at night that like I'm done with like everything on my to-do list so I don't have to worry about any of that. The only thing I've got left to do is like I'm just going to go read in bed and then go to sleep. And so I pretty much just write until I start getting tired and then I'm like, okay, that's a good stopping point. So that works for me.
Cool. Cool. And I think you mentioned something very important there, which is a lot of indie authors don't necessarily always do this full time. So how do you kind
Right.
of balance that? Like, I mean, for me, like I'm a therapist full time. So for me, like it's very difficult for me to write when I got home from work because I'm just drained from social interaction, that high sensitivity piece. So I have to
Yeah.
like set like 20 minutes like in the morning, like I get to work early and like I'll write for like half an hour, 20 minutes before work starts. So how
Mhm.
do you kind of balance that? I mean, I know that like your job is creative, so maybe that's a little bit more helpful. But how do you kind of, balance those things?
Um, well, so before I moved to Austin, I worked for more of like a marketing firm, an ad agency where it was all private, private companies.
Yep.
And it was really stressful. So I did not have any energy when I got home after that. It's just like watch TV, read something, go to bed. But when I moved here, I just happened to get a graphic design job with the state government, which I didn't even really know was a thing.
Mm,
And while there is some creativity, it's definitely not as demanding. There's a lot of like repetition. There are already kind of like set like branding standards, that sort of thing. So it's sort of like working more for like an in-house design agency. So that just freed up so much creativity where I just wasn't exhausted when I got home. I wasn't stressed. I could definitely like leave work at work. And so yeah, all of a sudden I just like had more energy and more free time. And so that's when I got more into reading and then, kind of went down this path. So just having a job that like I don't have to take home with me really
Mhm.
is really important. And then it also happens that like writing in the evening just works really well for me. And I also can't write for very long. Like I think I kind of max out at about an hour.
Mhm.
So I'm not writing till midnight or anything like that. It's enough time that I can just kind of fit it in there in the evening. Um, but and then it also means like I don't really have to do much of it on the weekends either. I can just sort of like plan it out and like you get like a chapter done every week and maybe do some editing. But yeah, it just I don't know, it just kind of works. And then like when I come up with ideas, wherever I might be, because I do all of my writing in Google Docs and um all of like my notes are in there and all of my scenes are like in a spreadsheet. So if I have like an idea, I can just quick like add it to those documents or just a note on my phone because you can't control like when these ideas just pop into your head. So I think that helps too, where you don't feel limited in when the creativity is going to come to you. You're like, no, I can write this down. I'm not going to forget about it, and you don't have to stress about like, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget about this awesome scene I just thought of. You just write it down wherever you are and come back to it later.
Good tip, actually. I think we underestimate Google Docs because it's actually really good for beta reading too because they can just comment right there,
Yeah.
stuff like that. And so what do you think is your kryptonite? What gets in your way when you try to write something? Because you said you don't have writer's blocks. That's good.
Mostly.
Oh,
I still do sometimes. So like my sort of writer's block comes in when I have to write something really easy, just like a little transition. I will get so stuck on this because I'm like, it's not really enough time isn't passing that I want to like actually break the scene and start a new one. I just need to get her from point A to point B, but I need it to be interesting and like kind of have a purpose. And sometimes those transitions will just like take me like 20 minutes to write or something. Or if I'm just so stuck on it, I will just procrastinate. And when I finally get back to it, I'm like, oh, well, this is easy enough. But it's just like I get stuck on these little things. Um, and sometimes it's just finding the right word because because I'm such a planner, I find that I try to write the sentence like correctly the first time. Like I really think through
yes.
every word I'm going to use versus like the people who can kind of do the stream of consciousness writing. Like I cannot do that. I'm like, no, it's going to appear on the screen. It has to be right, which is not a great thing.
It takes
So
so much
some,
longer. It's,
yeah, it
and
takes
I
so
think
long.
for me, like it's difficult because getting the first draft, like I've been told just get it out. Like it's gonna be a crap. Like you need to get it out, and I can't because I'm going back and making sure that it sounds good. But that's the whole point of
Mhm.
editing. So, like, have you found any kind of tips to kind of help yourself in that way that you can share with myself? Because that's my difficulty is that I can't like I want it to be really good off the bat, and I stop
Yeah,
myself. But then the stream of
I
consciousness,
right. I definitely have that problem too. And here's the thing. If you're writing it well the first time,
less
you
editing.
don't you don't have to do as much editing, you know? So and also it's like, like I said, I would try when I'm in the narrative stage of writing, I'll try to write like a chapter a week. And then as soon as I finish it, like probably the next day, give myself a little bit of time, I'll go back and read through it and do some editing. Because if you wait till you're done with the whole book, you're not going to really know, like, okay, what were my thoughts? What was I aiming for in this chapter? So I do try to get it like really nice and clean and tidy, like the first time
Mhm.
I write it. And yeah, I'm going to go back and I'm going to rewrite some things, or maybe a continuity issue will come up as I'm going. So that happens, but my editing is probably a lot less than what some people have to do because I'm not rewriting the whole book. There'll be like a couple of paragraphs or a couple of scenes that I find myself kind of tweaking over and over again just to get them right. But for the most part, like the story makes sense and it sounds pretty good. And, So it does, you're putting a lot more into that first draft, but then you don't need as much time for the second and the third and however many other drafts you do. Um, yeah, yeah. I
Good
mean,
advice.
I think it's fine.
Okay, makes me feel better about myself a little bit.
Yeah, you're just not gonna have to edit quite as much. It's
Exactly.
Yeah,
It'll be okay. It'll be all right.
yeah, it'll be okay.
It'll be so we're gonna talk about this book, just this one, because we don't want to go through spoilers in case somebody hasn't read it before,
Okay.
which I mean, if they haven't, they need to get on that. So if you need to describe Wild Heart of the Storm in one sentence or less, what is that sentence?
Okay, so, I was preparing for book 3, so let me let me think through it for a minute. So, like, what I usually tell people is this is sort of your traditional fantasy quest, right? She's been hidden away for a long time, living on her own, when suddenly her magic starts to manifest when she doesn't think it will, and she accidentally brings a dead wolf back to life, which is something she wasn't expecting. And it draws not only the attention of the mysterious metalsmith who lives on the other end of town, who seems to like know something, but it also draws the attention of assassins from across the sea. So then she's forced to flee with this mysterious metalsmith whom she barely knows, but like happens to know exactly who she is. And then the quest kind of commences.
Mm,
So I would say that's the first book is her learning, this magic she doesn't really know much about, how to control it, or even like what extent it's gonna, how it's gonna manifest even more. And then confronting her past, meeting new people, kind of the found family thing sort of happens. There are some battles, there's some kind of relationship things going on. So that's sort of the first book.
love that. Love it. Love it. And I think that that's probably one of my most like favorite things about it is that when I read it, like it did feel like that traditional like fantasy quest sort of thing. And like,
Mhm.
I don't know, I like that. I think that that's, you know, I think that classic, like if it's not broke, don't fix it sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I definitely liked that about it. And I love like the hidden identity sort of thing. Like that's like my favorite trope ever. So who was your favorite character to write and why?
Um, I mean, honestly, probably just the main character because um as the books go on, she becomes a lot more comfortable with her new role. And it happens in the first book too, but she just finds her strength, and that just kind of keeps happening more and more. And with it, she'll get kind of frustrated with like the political systems around her, the people that are trying to convince her of things, manipulate her, just needing things from her. And so sometimes this like newfound strength and confidence comes out like a little bit snarky, and I like that. I can kind of throw that in sometimes. And because of that too, I also really liked writing Hazel, who's one of the royal guards eventually, who kind of becomes more than just one of her guards. And because Hazel was really like very cold and like, you've brought all this chaos into my life and stuff, but she is thawed, and she already is very snarky, but like with that snarkiness and this like fierce loyalty that she has developed for Esme. She's so protective, and she's just one of those really great friends where you're just kind of like, no one's gonna cross her, and that's great.
Mhm.
So I like writing her character too.
What was the most challenging part about writing this book?
um Probably the magic. Like I had it very planned out, very organized, and like, here are the rules here. And I had a smaller group of characters in the first book, so I have all of their magic figured out and how it operates. But with each other book there are more characters, and they all have magic too. And like, how can I make it a little bit different for every person? How's it going to manifest in each of them? um and then the interactions with the magic, there's a lot of just kind of sparring and things like that, where she's practicing her skills, or or the guards are doing it, where they're just like, it's just kind of like a workout session for them. So it's like, how do I keep it for the reader like new and interesting? Okay, we already know that this character has fire magic and this one has water magic, but like, how can they interact differently that like keeps this little battle scene interesting, and it keeps your attention, and it isn't something you've already read. So sometimes that's a challenge, and a lot of those times I actually just like stand up and try to like kind of act them out, like how would this physically
Mhm.
work,
I
how
was
would
literally
these
just gonna
two.
ask that. You like read my mind. I
Yeah.
was gonna say about battle scenes. 'Cause a lot of people say battle scenes are difficult because obviously we
Yeah,
don't really fight with swords and
I don't typically
I mean
know.
I do. Maybe some people do. But that's actually a really good idea. So you've read my
Yeah.
mind. So acting it
Yeah,
out.
because yeah, I haven't actually, fought with swords before, or, even done like archery. So I did
Yeah,
a lot of research
I
about
love
this,
great.
like
So
what's the most effective, that sort of thing. But then also, yeah, like just like what are the logistics of this? Like, okay, if she's coming in this way, like how's he gonna block it? Yeah, so I really spend a lot of time like either visualizing it or standing up and kind of thinking about like, okay, if she's pivoting this way, what's her sword going to do, or what's the magic going to do, that sort of thing, to make it feel realistic. Yeah, so those can get kind of challenging, and I do know a lot of people that are fantasy readers that kind of like skip over the battle scenes or the fight scenes. So I really want to keep them interesting and engaging, like how do I make, bring this up to the next
yeah.
level in this book. So those can be
Definitely did
challenging.
that with Game of Thrones because there's just so many. And I just read Fire and Blood yesterday, and I know that sounds crazy, but yes, I did read the whole thing yesterday. I read this book in one sitting. And it's just it's like the same thing like over and over. I'm like, okay, I just want to know what happens at the end. Like, how does so
Yeah,
and so get killed? If they do, or how does it end? Like, that's all I want to know. So I think that that's a
yeah,
good point about needing to keep people engaged, especially when you have a trilogy. The second book, I believe, is the hardest, like, to get people to read. Like, the first one you got to grab them, but then the second one, like, do they want to continue? And then the third, do they want to
yeah.
finish? So that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely true. And in the third book, dark magic is introduced. And so then it's a whole different kind of magic, because you're like, how does it work? How does it interact with like individual magic and the raw magic that's inside their world, and what are its weaknesses, because I don't know, dark stuff always seems to like not have any weaknesses. So thinking that through, I'm like, okay, she needs to defeat this thing in the end. How
Mhm.
is she going to do this, and I really had to come up with, you know things that have worked for her in the past aren't going to work in this case. So how can she, I like to have kind of her thought process a lot in the stories, thinking through like, maybe I'll try this and maybe I'll try this, to arrive at something that hopefully will work, even if it only works a little bit. So, and then
That's relatable too, right? Because like that's how people figure things out, but a lot of
yeah,
the time sometimes, not a lot of the time, sometimes for some fantasy books it's like, okay, like that got solved really quickly. Like, I don't like, that's been my feedback for like a couple arcs that I've read lately, is like it got solved too fast.
yeah.
Like how does he or she just know like that's what you have to do? So I think that, appreciating that thought process piece.
Yeah, yeah, there are a lot, and because it's a single point of view, I had to think of a lot of different ways she can get information. Whether it's like the history of the kingdom, or different ways that like spells might work, or magic might interact. So she has a lot of different resources, and that's another thing. It's like, okay, how do I introduce some new resources to keep this interesting, so she's not like going back to the same well for all of her answers, on how to fix stuff. So that's something that, I've had to think of new options with each book. Um, and going back to the, what things are challenging to write in, I'm sure I had this in the first and second book too, but in the third book, there were a couple of like really heated emotional scenes that I felt like when I write, I really try to like feel what the character's feeling, because I'm hoping that will like come through more, which I think is good for the writing. It's maybe not good for my physical self because I'm like getting all anxious or I'm getting all emotional writing this stuff. And so I really wanted those scenes to feel very, very real. And I didn't think I could accomplish it by just writing in short, like 1 hour stints in the evenings. So when I got to those scenes, I just took a couple of vacation days from work because I'm like, I just need to devote like a full 8 hours of like really being in these scenes and making sure that they flow right, and I'm not repeating anything, and like the emotion is like getting higher and higher with each one. So I have had those types of issues too, where it's like the schedule that I usually keep with writing just wasn't really working for a couple of the scenes where I'm like, I need to like really, really immerse myself in these. And I do have that flexibility where, because I don't really take a lot of vacations, I'm just like, I'm gonna use my vacation days for this. So that works for me. I know that doesn't work for everybody, but yeah.
Cool, cool. Okay, and so what was your favorite scene or your favorite quote from this book?
Um,
Let's do,
okay.
let's do the entire thing, which is pretty hefty.
So I was thinking about book 3. Hold on though. I'll get my own copy. Because I do know which one I would pick, but I want to read it. I want to read it correctly. So, okay, so it's probably this one. This is at the very end of chapter 3. This is right after the once dead wolf um realived himself and bounded back into the woods, right? And everyone's like, no, nobody really knows what happened.
Hmm?
So all these like villagers are kind of freaking out, right? Because they think the wolf is dangerous. So this is the part I like at the very end. She said, let's see. Okay. Fionn struggled to look away as Carrick wrapped an arm around her shoulders and ushered her toward his shop. She trembled, glancing back to where the wolf had vanished into the woods. Though it wasn't the wolf Fionn feared, he'd most certainly been dead before she'd touched him. So I like that one.
Like that's like honestly, like you said, you use that kind of in your description of the book, so that kind of like sets you up for the rest. Um, and so sometimes when we write, we picture characters with certain traits and looking a certain way. So is there anybody that you imagine your main characters to be that currently exists in the model actor world?
Yeah. Um so I mean, yeah, I've thought about this. I think all writers think about this. And I don't know, if it was really up to me, I think I would pick like kind of somebody who isn't well known,
Mhm.
because me personally, I tend to like color that person's performance with like other stuff that they've done or stuff from their like personal lives, and it sometimes takes you out of the actual movie that you're watching. So I think ideally I would prefer that. Like I would just want somebody who really embodies the characters really well versus like a really well-known person who's really recognizable. But I will say, when I first started writing this, just sort of like size wise between the main character and the mysterious metalsmith, I sort of pictured like the two characters from Game of Thrones. Like the Jason Momoa guy,
Yes.
and then the dragon girl. I
Yeah.
didn't watch the show because it was super violent, so I only watched the first episode, but like I've
Comparison
seen them
kills
everywhere, and I
trope.
was like,
Ah,
yeah.
I can see it. Okay, I like it. I like it. I like,
So like,
yeah.
yeah, so sort of like the size, difference between the two, that was like kind of what I was picturing, but the actual characters look different in my head.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome. Awesome. So let's move on to the last part of the interview. And it's kind of just some fun questions, things that I would want to know, getting to know somebody. So tell me a little bit about what you enjoy doing other than reading and writing.
oh man, I was just gonna say reading. I
I
just,
literally like the first author interview, I was like, you need to say other than reading because we all know that they love to read.
I mean,
And I
I
hope you do
yeah,
if you're right.
that's my favorite. My favorite thing is to just read. I also like to like binge watch the same shows over and over again. Like currently I'm just rewatching New Girl for like, I don't know, the fourth time.
I've never seen all of New Girl. I started watching it, but I've never seen the whole thing.
See, I was the same way. Like I think I had started it back when it first came out and I
Yeah.
got through a few episodes and I was like, this is
Eh,
silly.
yeah.
And then but now I'm like, no, I love it. So but I think partly because of the pandemic, like I've just been rewatching a lot of shows that are just really low stakes and they're just
Yeah.
funny and happy. And because I'm rewatching them, I know how they're gonna go. So there isn't like a whole lot of stress involved. So like I've rewatched Modern Family a bunch of times, Schitt's
Mhm.
Creek. I
Love Schitt's
just
Creek.
really, yeah, I'll just keep watching them. There are a few shows that I've watched that, that I don't know how they're going to end. Like I really loved The Bear. Like that was so well done. I loved it, but also super stressful. Like
Yes.
I'm just like I could never work in a restaurant. This is so stressful. So there are a few things like that. But other than that, like I have two new kittens, so they also take a lot of my time. I've always had a lot of animals, and my animals all were getting older. So when the last one said goodbye, I was like immediately, okay, I need animals in my apartment. So
Mm,
I've got two little orange tabby brothers, and they're both sleeping right now, but
so cute.
that actually like takes a lot of my time. Like they're just really entertaining, just kind of, and also watching that they don't, destroy things or get stuck somewhere because they're still really small.
Yeah. Yeah.
um I also like nature related things, which you can probably tell from my books. Animals in nature. So I have a whole like balcony garden that, I like to tend to, or just kind of like stare out the window and look at the trees and stuff. I don't know, my life's kind of boring. So this is why I write these
Okay.
crazy stories.
What do you grow? What
What's that?
do you grow in your garden?
Oh, mostly it's like flowers and greenery because the first year I was living here, I grew basil and tomatoes, and like I was like this close to going out there to harvest the basil. And then the next day it was all gone because a squirrel ate it all. So a squirrel. I,
Oh,
I think it's because we were like in a drought and it was like one of the ways it
yeah.
could get, moisture. I do have basil out there again. So we'll see how it does. And then I have like a lot of aloes because
Yeah.
that does really well with all this heat and
Yeah.
sun. But mostly it's like I like to have like a lot of greenery like ferns and stuff like that, and then, some little pops of colors that I know will do well in this heat, which I'll probably have to go out there and just kind of rearrange like which things are getting sun so they don't burn because
Right.
that happens here. Yeah.
Well, I like to garden too, so I'm always curious. Um, and this is my favorite question of the whole interview. I'm just gonna get my Goodreads up right now.
Oh.
What are some books or some authors that you would recommend?
Okay, so if we're sticking with the fantasy genre, some of my favorites are Uprooted and Spinning
Yes,
Silver.
I love Nona
They're
Novik.
so good.
Mhm.
I also really liked Priory of the Orange Tree.
Yes, so
That was a
long, but
it's
so good. And I
yeah,
didn't do the next one, The Day of the Fallen Knight, I think it is.
I
But
think
I
that's a
absolutely loved
prequel.
it. Is it?
Yeah, I
I
I
loved
I think.
Priory.
Yeah, yeah, I do have the other one on my TBR list. But yeah, I love that too. It's like 800 pages, but I'm like, but it's a
Mhm.
standalone. So,
Yes,
you're just like, I'm
it
committing
is
to
a
just
prequel. It is a
this.
prequel, you're right. It says Root of
Yeah,
Chaos 0.
yeah.
Mhm. I'm gonna put that up.
I also loved well, this one like had a little bit more violence than I liked, but A Marvelous Light was really good. I'm not positive if it's listed under the fantasy genre or under the romance genre because it is
Who is it
an
by?
MM romance. What's that?
Who's it by?
Oh, Freya. Let me see her last name. Freya Marsk, Marske. It's like sort of historical with maybe some more magical realism. But I really loved that just the
Found
magic
it.
operated differently in this um, in this book. And so it was just kind of fun to see, you know, how they could control it and that sort of thing. So I liked that aspect of it. But just be warned that it starts out with like a really gruesome scene, and you're like, what is this book? And then and then that character's gone. So you're like, who am I rooting for here? So it took a minute to kind of get over that and get into the story. And then for like more of a cozy fantasy, if you don't
Yeah.
want anything super high stakes, I liked Legends and Lattes.
So I wanted
It's just
to read that one. I just read this morning. Actually, let me get the name of it. Like, and when you were talking about like low stakes and stuff, that's literally what it was. I was gonna say something about it, and then you reminded me. What is it? Hold on, let me see. And it's her debut, so I was like really sad because I was like, okay, that's her only book out
there are
right
no more.
now. Let me see. Come on, like my internet is like super slow, but it was really cute. It was really good. Love Letters and Thirst Tonics by Haley Blackwood.
Ooh.
It was really good. It was basically about like it's a vampire and she's like basically the whole thing is there's like a male vampire and like he comes into town and then like her shop gets destroyed and he helps her put her shop back together. Like it's literally like the most chill thing ever, and it was such a good palate cleanser.
Mhm.
And there's another one, Jenna Wolfhart, Mind in Magic. I'm gonna read that one next too because that one was also a cozy fantasy, and I'm like, yes. I was like,
Yeah. I
mhm,
like that sort of subgenre. I don't know if it's
yeah.
always been there, but it is
I don't
nice where you're
know. I
like,
never knew about it until
yeah.
Madeline Elliott writes some cozy fantasy, and Griffin Murphy wrote Love at First Lance, and I interviewed her as well. That one's also good. So I recommend that one too.
Okay. Yeah, they are you're right. They're good palate cleansers. Like
Yeah.
there's you still get a little of the magic, you know. It's still a fun world to be in, but it's just like a slice of life kind of book more than
Yeah. Yeah.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are
I
fun.
was literally just telling someone who she cleans my house, but she's definitely a friend now. And I was like, she's like, what are you reading? Because whenever she comes, like I'll read a book because I need to stay, I'm like, all right, like let me keep her company because, talk while you clean. And she's like, what are you reading? And I'm like, well, I just read this and I finished it. And she's like, oh. um, but what kind of advice would you give to an aspiring author?
Hmm. Okay. So I got a lot of advice early on, and it didn't all help me. So I would say, like, figure out what's right for you, what works for you, and uh, don't always listen to the stuff where the people who are like, you have to write every single day. And I'm like, I get what you're saying, and that's probably good for some people who would otherwise procrastinate forever and ever. But like that was not right for me. That just made it stressful, it made it feel
Yeah.
like an obligation. So that didn't work for me. And like the when you write, what time of day, where you write, like just once you find a one of those things that just works really well for you, just stick with it, because what works for you is not going to work for other people. But then also being flexible to, okay, I find myself getting really distracted in this location, like maybe I'll try someplace else, maybe I'll go to a coffee shop, or maybe this time of day, um like I said, like writing in the evening, everything on my to-do list is done, so I don't have all of that stuff spinning around in my mind and making me anxious. So think about, yeah, maybe just changing up the time of day would help a lot. Or for me, I can't really do like the what is it called? Like the Pomodoro method, like where you do like 20 minutes, like the kitchen timer method. Cause I'm just constantly looking at the clock, you know? And then it's stressful because I'm like, I gotta write something good. I only have 20 minutes. So those things didn't work for me, but like they might work for other people. So I think be flexible in, you know, how you write, when you write, where you write, all of that stuff,
Mhm.
until you find something that works well for you. And then this might be a little thing, but I think it's worth mentioning for people who like get tension headaches, or like when like they're looking at a screen for a long time, maybe get headaches from that. Something that has really helped me is changing the background color of my Google Doc to like kind of a light sage green, because
Ooh,
green can actually help like take headaches away, because it kind of like emulates nature, versus like blue light is kind of the opposite of that. But there are like green light therapies and things like
yeah.
that to help with like migraines and stuff.
Mhm.
So I do that on my Kindle too, like when I'm reading on my
Yeah.
phone versus like, ideally my regular Kindle, but I'll change the background color to green, just so that like if I have to be looking at a screen, it's a little bit easier on me. So just, things like that. Pick a font that makes you feel happy. Like, I'm a graphic designer, so fonts are important to me, but like I don't stick with the Times New Roman and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I pick fonts that make me happy, that I want to see, and I think little things like that really help. Um and then the other thing is, like, when I first started this, because I wasn't a writer, and so I had a lot of self-doubt, and because I journal a lot, I was like, okay, I'm going to write down all the things I'm worried about, all the things I'm scared of, going into this, so that I can acknowledge them and maybe see how silly they are, right? So I went back and looked at them last night, and I was seeing a lot of stuff of like, I'm worried people aren't going to like this, or nobody's going to read this. And it's just like, well, people do like this and people do read it. And it made me really aware of, I think in the beginning, we kind of have this inclination to sort of hitch our wagons to another popular series or genre or author, and in my case I was like, there's a lot of really great popular stuff out there, but it's not quite the same like subgenre that I'm doing. So I think it's really important for debut authors to find the right readers, because for example, like romantasy is really really popular, and there are some people who have found my book expecting it to be romantasy, and I'm like, I mean, there's a little romance, but you're not going to get an HEA until like books 4 and 5, so beware. Like, that's not going to happen yet. And so, if you are trying, you're like, yeah, I can get a lot of exposure by kind of grouping it in with this really popular category, but then you're finding the wrong readers, and so those star ratings and those reviews are not going to be super helpful. So I think really getting clear about what exactly your story is, with your branding, social media, all that stuff, your cover design too. Like, I purposefully went with stuff that was more like kind of scenery type things, instead of like the picture of the main character on the front, because I'm like, to me that screams like YA more
Mm,
than anything. And if it's two people, that to me is going to be like more romantasy, right? You're getting more into the romance. So I try to kind of narrow it down a little bit with the cover design. Um, I think that's really important. The keywords you use, the description you have for it, your comp titles, like all that stuff is so important that I didn't really think about it, early on, that, all of these things are like searchable. So make sure you're using the right words. And, if you are using a word that could incorrectly lead readers to think, oh, it's more this kind of thing, like, just be really selective about that stuff, about the categories you put it in. And that's going to help you find your readers, instead of readers who are, really, really into, maybe like the main part of the genre, but not this specific subgenre.
mm.
So also KU,
Yeah.
Kindle Unlimited.
I
Do Kindle Unlimited.
I love Kindle Unlimited. I know some people don't like it, and I understand, that you can't distribute your ebook, wide, but I love
Yeah.
Kindle Unlimited. I pretty much only read on KU at this point.
Yeah,
Um,
same. I do
I love
Kindle Unlimited
the
or
authors,
library.
what I do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
I feel like
it's
it got
it's
really
really
dark.
great. And I actually got really into it because a lot of the books that I wanted to read were more like queer romances, and those are really hard to find, like
Yes.
through libraries and stuff, because they're not traditionally published, and so the libraries have a hard time getting it. So that's kind of how I found my way into Kindle Unlimited. But for certain genres, like in fantasy is one of them, that is a place where you're just going to find a lot of readers who wouldn't otherwise find your book, because to them they're kind of like, oh, I can just read that for free, so I think that's really helpful, to do that. Yeah.
Mhm.
So.
Really, I mean, honestly, really good advice. I think that a lot of indie authors, especially, like, have to figure this all out themselves. So I think that's great. That you can kind of share that stuff. Um, do you listen to music while you write?
I don't. I
Hmm.
don't because of the whole distraction thing. Like and I've tried things like that are more instrumental, and it's still like I still like find myself like thinking about the music more than the words. And there are a couple of songs that like I'll sometimes play for myself that are more like these kind of epic songs from like Lord of the Rings or something, or like there was an Ed Sheeran song from The Hobbit. Um I See Fire, I think is what it's called. And it was like, it's so good and powerful. And so sometimes before I write like a really epic scene, I'll listen to that to just kind of like get me in that mode. But when I'm actually writing, it needs to be quiet because
Mhm.
they're already going to be like cats bothering me and other
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
So
No, I relate. And I know that you said that, when you wrote your book, you pulled all the tropes you love, from all these different books. So did you like use like any of those worlds that you've seen or anywhere in the world that exists to kind of like inspire your world, like the landscape and what it looks like?
yeah, actually what I did was because um I wanted this world to feel really accessible even to people who aren't fantasy readers. So for example, the mortal realm that she's in the beginning where she has an apple orchard, like that is just directly out of my childhood in Wisconsin. So like, I knew exactly how this place was going to look. Like we would always go to an apple orchard to pick out our own pumpkins for Halloween. And they would have like all
Yeah.
these like really fresh apples because that's when you harvest them. And it just smelled amazing. And
Oh
I'm
my,
like,
sorry, like it's literally like thundering really loud. Apparently,
oh,
there's a tornado warning here, but I'm not gonna go outside then.
okay.
I was like, what is that? And I thought it was my husband. Oh no. But I looked outside and it's thunder. My
Okay.
ADHD just hit me right there. But I can imagine you probably have that in Texas too. Like they have some pretty serious storms down there because it's been so hot here with
Yes.
humidity. My mom's in Florida, like on vacation, and it's been hotter here this week, which is nuts. But
Oh my
anyway, I
gosh.
am so
Yeah.
sorry.
Our heat dome finally like, I don't know,
Uh,
burst. So
it's
it's like
crazy.
it's normal hot here. It's still
Yeah.
hot.
So
So
I still apologize for that. That just scared the crap out of me. So you were saying that there are some worlds that kind of, inspired it. And living in
yeah.
Wisconsin, going to do those things as a kid.
Yeah, so like the mortal realm, because it has like seasons and stuff, it has kind of a Midwest feel, where you can grow your own food and all this kind of stuff. And then my little nod to Austin, Texas was there's a scene where she's noticing that it's quiet outside, and usually she would hear just like these loud cries of the grackles when they're roosting, which is exactly what we have here. Like in like the parking lots of the grocery store, like if you're there at that time of day, it is deafening. So I was like, I'm just gonna throw that in there too. She's like noticing that they're
Cool.
not there. So things like that. And then when she gets to Tremaine, it's more there aren't seasons there, so there should be a lot of stuff growing, but there isn't because that's another problem she has to deal with. But for the most part, I just try to like really imagine myself in these places and make them, like I said, accessible to people who aren't familiar with this. So I pull a lot of imagery in the beginning of like this is kind of how I visualize this being, or these buildings they think are going to kind of look like this. So I want people to feel like they're there and that it isn't,
Mhm.
even though it is a different world, like they can still feel like they're a part of it, like it's still recognizable.
That's
So
when, so like maybe I'm in the minority. I hate description to like, not to like a fault, but I read books fast, right? So, I told you that I read your book in literally probably a couple
yeah.
hours. I just sat there and I have ADHD. So, I read very fast. And so the description, like, I appreciate the description, but like not too much. So I think that the way that
Yeah.
like you described like Tremaine and things like that, like it was like, okay, like I know where I'm at, like I can like visualize it and then I can
Hmm.
keep going with the plot, right? Like
Yeah.
it was not paced well, that's not the word, but it was done in a way that, wasn't like overly descriptive, I think. It felt balanced. That's the word, balanced. Um,
Thank you.
so for sure.
Yeah, I try to find, like, natural places I can
Yes,
add that stuff in, but I also don't wanna get, a chapter or 2 later after you've already arrived at this
right, and
place
you're
where you're
like, "What does
finally
it look like?"
realizing, "Oh, it looks like this?" Like, I've already painted a totally different scene in my head, and now I have to like move it around. So I
Mhm.
want to get some stuff in there right away. But I also, yeah, I want it to feel natural. Like,
Yeah.
why are we noticing this thing now? Which, it helps since the character hasn't seen some of these places or hasn't been there in 9 years. So there's reason for her to sort of notice these
Yeah.
aspects without it feeling forced. So,
All
yeah.
right. And so our final question, do you have any events coming up or anywhere that we can meet you and get some signed copies?
Okay, so my third book came out last month, and it just so happened that the Austin Public Library was doing its very first like book festival like a
Oh,
week later, and I'm like, "Oh, this is perfect." So and it was really successful, and now I feel more comfortable talking to people about my books. So I don't have any scheduled right now, but like I do feel more confident that I could
apply.
do some book fairs and things like that in the future. So we'll see what pans out.
Cool. I'm sure like I love, getting to meet authors and I mean even just getting to interview them. It's an honor, but also just like cuz like I reach out to authors and I've said this in interviews before. I reach out to authors whose books that I really really liked. So, like we're talking like I would like die on a hill for these books. And so it's just so cool. Like, when people like yourself are like, yeah, like absolutely, I'd love to do that. And I'm just like, oh my God, like I'm like talk to this author, that looking so cool. But I've been doing this since January. So it's been like almost 6 months of doing this. And I look at my shelf here. This is my indie shelf. I have interviewed not that one. This is my indie shelf, and I have
Yeah.
interviewed almost every author on this shelf, aside from this one, which I would love to interview them. And what other one? I think this is probably it. Yeah, I've interviewed every other author on the shelf, and like it's just been so cool, like to kind of do that and get that experience. And I imagine, having people like come up to you and be like, "Oh my God, like I love your book," and you're just like, "Thank you." Like you're just right? Like it kind of like it's weird. It's weird
Mhm.
in some ways I've heard people say, but it's great that I mean, I'm so happy that you agreed to do this interview and I can't wait to see what else we have coming from you. So there's two more books
Mhm.
in this series, you said.
Yeah, so there will be 5 total.
Okay.
So I'm currently working on yeah, figuring out how the 4th book is going to play out. So and for the people that like thought it was romantasy, like you'll get more of that in book 4. So you've been waiting for this really slow burn to kind of
Over.
pay off. it will it will partly pay off in the 4th book. So,
Well,
yeah.
I am just so happy that, I stumbled upon this and I think
Yeah.
everybody needs to read this book as well as the series so far. It's just absolutely wonderful. I don't even know what else to say about it. It's just so classic fantasy and you
Thank
would
you.
love it, especially if it's something that you're like first getting into fantasy. I think it's a great book for that. Uh,
Yeah, like I had my mom read it, like one of my early drafts, and I don't know how far through she was, but she's like, "Is this like present day?" And I'm like, "Mom, there are no cars, there are no cell phones. Like, why do you think that?" And she goes, "Well, because there's glass in the windows." I was like,
um,
"Okay." So
that's
I was
really
like,
cute.
okay, while this kind of has the feel of being like medieval, it is its own world. So there might be some advancements that like this world has that our world doesn't. But so even for her, that was a stretch for her to believe that this place had glass. She was still able to like appreciate it and understand what was going on. And I don't think she's ever read anything with like magic in it. So, I do think most non-genre readers can get into this. So and that was kind of my goal because because I went into it and I'm like, I can't write a crazy epic fantasy because I won't be able to keep track of everything, you know? So I think, readers like me will like it.
And readers like myself. So,
Mhm.
hopefully, this will get to the audience that you would love it to get to. And thank you again so
Mhm.
much for taking the time out of your day to talk with me. And I can't wait to see what else you come up with.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. All right. Bye bye.
Okay.